In the early morning of Monday, June 3rd, 1991, Denise Huber left a Morrissey concert at the Los Angeles Forum and began driving toward Orange County. At 2 a.m., she dropped off a friend and continued on her way home. That morning, when her parents woke up at their Newport Beach home where Denise also lived, they discovered she hadn't made it home from her concert the night before, and they began to panic. They frantically contacted Denise's friends, and when no one had seen her, they called the police. Tammy Brown, Denise's best friend, began searching on her own. Driving down Corona Del Mar Freeway, also known as 57, she noticed a car that looked like Denise's. When she got close, she noticed that it was Denise's car and it had a flat tire. Skid marks led to where the car was sitting, and further inspection revealed that the battery was dead because the emergency flashers had been going for so long. No keys or a purse were found, and no signs of foul play, blood, or any other damage were visible. The police began investigating this odd disappearance, and the Orange County Sheriff's Department assisted. A billboard along the highway just where the car was found went up, featuring Denise's car, her picture, and a plea asking for anyone with info to call the police. Television stations all over Southern California began covering the case, and it was well known for a while. However, after time went on, new leads became scarce, and the case grew cold. Hi, I'm Hallow. Welcome to Freaky What. I love telling stories about mysteries, crime, paranormal, and anything else I think is freaky. I really appreciate you watching, and if you enjoy this channel, I hope you'll subscribe and watch my other stories. Now, let's get to it. July 9th, 1994. Two small business owners, Elaine Canalia and Jack Court, were at a Prescott Valley, Arizona swap meet, trying to sell items from their paint distribution business. A man they had met at other swap meets walked up and began talking to them. He was a paint contractor named John Famero who was offering to sell them a large amount of colorant at a great price. This was an offer they couldn't refuse, as these products were typically quite expensive. Canalia and Court were thrilled to go pick up this colorant, so along with Court's 10-year-old grandson, they followed Famero to his house on Cochise Drive in Dewey, Arizona. Even though his house was in a great part of town, the backyard was scattered with hundreds of old paint cans, and in the driveway, they could barely see a Ryder moving truck sitting next to an old pickup truck and partially covered by a tarp. As they got out, Jack's 10-year-old grandson began playing with a cap gun. Immediately, Famero got onto him and began hurrying them along. The young boy then asked if he could use the bathroom, and Famero nervously said the water had been turned off in his house. After Famero quickly loaded the materials that they had purchased into their truck, he said thank you and stood there until they left. As Elaine and Jack drove away, they looked at each other and began talking about how strange this encounter was. They also mentioned the rental truck and how it looked as though it could have been stolen because of the way he was trying to hide it. Even though Famero watched them as they drove off, they were able to write down the plate number on the Ryder truck. 3 days after this encounter, a friend of the couple, who was also a Phoenix police detective, Steve Gregory, came to their warehouse to buy some paint. Jack and Elaine told him about the event and gave him the information they had collected. After contacting the Ryder company, Gregory learned that the truck was, in fact, stolen. So he passed the information on to the Yavapai County Sheriff's Department. On the morning of July 13th, 1994, Yavapai County Deputy Joe DiGiacomo was waiting for the call. "You're clear to proceed to 685 Cochise Drive." He got the go-ahead to enter the Prescott Country Club development to find the Ryder truck parked in a driveway. Once he stopped, he noticed something very strange. He could see an electrical cord running out from the back of the truck across the property toward another house. He immediately suspected that he was looking at a meth lab. He then proceeded to the front door and knocked. When no one answered, he radioed the narcotics unit and began looking inside to see if anyone was visible inside the home. The narcotics team arrived with a search warrant and brought with them a locksmith who quickly removed the lock on the Ryder truck's back door. When the door opened, it revealed many more paint cans and a running chest freezer. The freezer was locked and all of the seals were taped over with masking tape. The detectives carefully cut the tape and began to open the freezer door. The odor of death permeated the air with a sickening and pungent stench. Detective Mike Garcia slowly reached into the freezer and felt inside a large black plastic bag, and he was shocked to find a human arm. The homicide unit was immediately called. Under the supervision of Lieutenant Scott Masher, a homicide investigation immediately began. He began describing everything that happened to a video camera that recorded all the action as they investigated. The investigators removed 3 layers of plastic bags until a human body, frozen in the fetal position and handcuffed, was revealed. The freezer was disgusting with layers of frozen fluids. The head on the body was covered with small white grocery bags and tied around the neck. Careful to maintain evidence, the investigators stopped and planned for the Ryder truck to be transported just as it was to the state crime lab in Arizona. Around 5:30, a car pulled into the driveway where the Ryder truck once sat. Inside, John Famero and his mother looked stunned as officers rushed the car and arrested Famero on the spot. Once they reached the county detention center, Famero was read his rights and immediately he asked for an attorney. Famero's neighbors described him as a quiet recluse who strayed away from people. They described his daily routine of getting the mail as very odd and always keeping his head down the entire time. Famero had moved to the home 2 years prior with his then brother-in-law. Police also learned that his contractor's license was revoked for not paying his workers and performing crappy work. The Ryder truck had been parked in the driveway for a few months, with the extension cord from the freezer being plugged into an outside socket on Famero's mother's house. His mother had no idea that the plug had anything to do with a murder. The team of investigators searched the home. Inside, they found dozens of boxes, but 2 stood out. They were marked Christmas, and inside they found a blood-stained plastic purse containing credit cards and the California driver's license of Denise Huber, a bloody hammer, and a nail puller. On July 14, 1994, an autopsy was performed by medical examiner Anne Buchholz. The still frozen, unidentified body was thawed out using hair dryers, and bolt cutters were used to remove the handcuffs because they were so tight. They quickly determined the victim was female, and after removing layers of plastic bags from the head, they discovered duct tape covering the mouth and eyes. Many disturbing discoveries were made that verified she was indeed assaulted and AR'd. Finally, fingerprints identified that this was Denise Huber. Dr. Buchholz reported that the cause of death were 31 blows to the head with such force that the bones contained pieces of plastic and hundreds of tiny divots. The skull was so shattered that it could not be completely put back together. Inside Famero's house, dozens of other pieces of vital evidence were collected. Ripped women's clothing, keychains, high-heeled shoes with scrapes on the back, Huber's checkbook, her AAA card, makeup, and lots more bloodstains. They discovered extremely incriminating pieces such as men's clothing with bloodstains, handcuff keys that matched the handcuffs on Denise's body, and newspapers with stories about her disappearance that were stacked neatly in a closet. It appeared as though some of the women's items that were recovered were not Denise Huber's. Many of the women that these items belonged to were verified as safe, but many could not be identified, leading investigators to believe that Denise may not be the only victim. One of the most significant discoveries was a receipt for a freezer that matched the one in the Ryder truck. It was delivered to a storage unit only 9 days after Denise Huber's disappearance. After an Orange County criminologist performed luminol tests, they found traces of Huber's DNA inside the storage unit. John Famero had 2 siblings, Warren and Marion. Their home life was controlled by an overbearing and domineering mother who was extremely religious, Anna Famero. She told the children what to do at all times of the day, where to sit when riding in the car to prevent whispering, and the same during television time. Their father never objected to Mrs. Famero and seemed almost afraid of her. The children were not allowed to invite kids home and rarely allowed to interact outside the home. As the Famero kids grew into teens, their mother would listen to phone conversations, search their rooms and their belongings, and refuse them contact with the opposite sex. When John's sister, Marion, grew tired of her overbearing mother, she applied to attend a chiropractic school in Iowa. However, her mother quickly cut ties and refused to contact her any longer. John's brother Warren was convicted of Child M in 1980. and sentenced to 5 years in a mental facility. John Famero stood trial in Orange County, California, since Denise Huber died in the storage facility in Laguna Hills, as evidence suggested. The trial started on May 8, 1997, and quickly brought to light Famero's relationship to women and the aggressive nature and inappropriate behavior with many victims. His first relationship that became serious was with a woman named Helen Lyons. This long and painful relationship ended due to an abortion, and Lyons transferred to a Missouri college. This apparently devastated Famero. Another relationship to Darlene Miller began after Famero tried to romance her for years by sending gifts and flowers. They even traveled to New York one weekend and stayed in a luxury suite next to Times Square. One night, while on their vacation, Famero put a pair of handcuffs on Miller after some foreplay. He attached her to a piece of metal in front of the hotel window and began stripping her. He then opened the curtains and left the room. Famero didn't return until the evening. Upon returning, Famero began laughing over the supposed joke. Afraid, Miller laughed along with him until they returned to California. After feeling safe, she said she never wanted to see him again. Even after tearful apologies and many phone calls, Famero never regained the relationship. Story after story, Famero seemed to be a smooth talker and was convincing when it came to starting relationships, but for some reason, he would exploit every woman, every time, and scare them off. Famero did not testify at his trial. He refused to talk about any details. Because of this, there were many unanswered questions. However, we do know that when Denise Huber was driving down the highway and her tire blew, she activated her hazard lights. It is believed that she exited her car and was standing outside of it when Famero drove by. It seemed that things happened so fast, so Famero may have been on the lookout for an easy victim. There was no blood found near the car, and Huber didn't have any injuries other than the blunt force to the head, so she may have gotten into Famero's car willingly to get help. Famero didn't look threatening, as he was a smaller build and had a kept beard, and he had the ability to charm, so maybe he offered her a ride home. Police also found 2 sheriff's deputies' uniforms on Famero's property, so he may have acted as law enforcement. Another unfortunate fact is that Denise Huber's blood alcohol content was between 0.08 and 0.11%, which made her intoxicated and lowered her judgment. Prosecutors steered away from this as they needed to prove that Huber was forcibly taken in order to push for the death penalty. Famero probably rendered Denise Huber unconscious as quickly as possible, knowing that driving anywhere away from where she lived would alarm her. He probably hit her in the head not long after picking her up, and then duct taped her face and eyes and handcuffed her in case she woke up. The medical examiner testified that the instrument used to render her unconscious was a 14-inch iron nail puller that they found in Famero's home. Scrape marks were found on the back of Huber's shoes, which shows that he probably drug her from his car to the storage unit after arriving. Early the next morning, Famero removed her clothes, committed horrible acts, and then covered her with plastic bags and tied them tightly. He then took a claw hammer and hit her in the head repeatedly, so hard that the pieces of white plastic from the bags were embedded in her skull. This was a violent and brutal murder. On May 22, 1997, John Famero was convicted of murder, sodomy, and kidnapping after the jury deliberated for only 5 hours. On September 6, 1997, Judge John Ryan formally sentenced Famero to death, and Famero was sent to death row at San Quentin Penitentiary. Now, more than 26 years after John Famero committed horrible and violent acts against Denise Huber, he is still very much alive and well. Over 750 inmates on death row are caught up in the litigation over California's death penalty, one of whom is John Famero. In 2011, his automatic appeal was rejected in the California Supreme Court. His execution and those of the other inmates is tied up because of the litigation since 2006. No other women or victims have been identified, and Famero's case remains open in Arizona. Thank you so much for watching today, sharing, and commenting. I couldn't do this without you, and I really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you again soon.